Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the first ever Power Hour at the siberXchange. My name is Ali Hirji, and I have the pleasure of working at Durham College in both artificial intelligence and in cybersecurity. I lead the advisory council for the siberXchange, and approximately 1 week ago, the CEO of CyberX, Mehdi Raza, came up to me and asked me to lead these daily sessions called the Power Hour at lunch. What do we mean by power? Michel Foucault, a well-known theorist in sociology, says, power produces reality. It produces domains of truth and knowledge. And today, I'm joined by Hugh Burley for an insight into the truths and the realities of being a director of information security. We're going to be learning from Hugh about his journey, learning about his perspectives, and more importantly, looking at his vision for the post-secondary space in Canada as we live in the new normal in post-pandemic. As mentioned earlier, my name is Ali Hirji, and I have the pleasure of joining Hugh Burley today, who is going to take us through in the next hour on a Power Hour journey of his experiences and his learnings of what's true and what's reality in being a director of information security. Hugh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ali. Great to be here.
Pleasure's all mine. Hugh, so let's begin with a little bit about you. Where did this all start? How did you land up as a director of information security at Simon Fraser University?
Well, I'm at Thompson Rivers University, so we better get that right, because Kirinovik at Simon Fraser will be pretty upset if I try and take this away, I think.
Got it correct now. Go ahead.
So I'll start out, I'll tell you a little bit about Thompson Rivers University, just so people know where I am and get a perspective of what kind of work I do. So Thompson Rivers University resides in Kamloops, British Columbia, which is the interior of the province.
Yeah.
So good morning, everyone on the West Coast. It's just 9 o'clock out here in the morning. The story of how I got where I am today is rather a long one, as you can tell from the gray hair. I haven't just stepped into the workforce, but I don't want to mislead people that this was something that I established as a young man that I would want to do, right? This was not even on the radar when I was younger. I started out wanting to be a psychologist, and I was enamored with Sigmund Freud and that whole group of theorists when I was in high school. And I headed off to the University of Waterloo to pursue a career in that area, or at least to gain a deeper understanding of psychology. And I wanted to fulfill Freud's original dream of psychology as a science. And as it turned out, it really, in the end, wasn't something that I wanted to pursue as a career. When I got to the end, or near the end of that program, I realized that, the opportunities were very few and far between for psychology. I knew I didn't want to spend time in correctional services or, psychometrics in school systems or doing research. And I love research. I think it's wonderful, but you have to have a pretty big dedication to pursue a real research. So I ended up spending time. I moved out west primarily to learn how to ski. I was a young guy. That was sort of my key interest at the time. And then, of course, the reality always strikes, and you have to find a way to keep life going and find a job. So I spent a number of years doing different types of work. I was a house painter, and I was, I did various other jobs. But at some point, you have to make a career choice. And much as I delayed that by attending university and skiing and that sort of thing, I eventually did decide I have to find a way to create a career for myself. And the career that I chose initially was actually film. So how do you get from film to information security, you might ask?
From psychology to film to information security.
Yes. So, I did give the psychology thing a go, right? I went out to UBC and I did volunteer work at the psychiatric hospital and did all that, just to confirm, no, this is not where I want to be. This is not what I want to do in my life. I'd always had a deep interest in film, love film. And so I went after that. I did a course with Dave Hardy, who
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure where he's gone these days, in Vancouver. And at that time, the government had mandated that the Roger and Shaw provide video studios for the public so that we had a chance to build content. Well, this was quite a while ago, before you could build content with your notebook or your phone.
Right.
And so I spent a couple of years doing that, learning about the technology, learning about how to direct, how to light, how to do all the things associated with film and video production. It was great. I loved it. But in the end, I decided, where my interest is on that technical stuff. That's where I really like to be. That's the thing that really makes me interested. So I went to the library at the time. This is pre-internet. We used to go to these big buildings full of books and journals and
Books like this, I dare assume.
exactly. So I went off to the library and I started doing some research on sort of the leading thinking on video, and I was very interested in interactive video. Right? Why do we just have this single stream of content that we push out, but nobody can do anything with it other than watch it? Right? You can't at that time you couldn't even fast forward. All you could do was switch channels.
Right.
And so I became very interested in this idea of interactive video, and I started developing a business case for interactive video. At the time, it was real estate, which in the evenings, the video channels would run these videos of junk. Basically, they had no content for the evening, so my idea was we'll put video in there, and when not only that, we'll figure out how to let people scroll back and forth on the video. Now, this is a very interesting sort of stage because the technology wasn't there, right? The technology wasn't in existence to do that. And streaming video was not something that was actually available because it took 90 megabits per second of bandwidth to stream video. So the compression wasn't there, and all those things were against me. The bandwidth wasn't available. But that led me to pursue a career looking at how we could solve that problem. So that's what really drove me, right? And now I was very fortunate. I went out and started looking for a job with those parameters, right? A company that was involved with streaming or interaction. And now this was the 80s. And so before the XT, way back. And I happened to find a job with a company called Gandalf Data Limited.
Okay.
And I joined them in 1988. I told them what I wanted to do. They said, "That's great, kid. Come on in. We're going to give you a job." And I did. I said, "I'll do whatever job you want. I mean, I'll do anything as long as I get to work with this technology."
Okay.
And I think that's really where my technology career began, right? Now, technology was different, but
yeah.
So now I'm still a long way from information security.
Right. But you're dealing with data, and I think a very important aspect that you brought up here is that you identified a problem. As I mentioned to you, I teach in AI as well as in cybersecurity, and one of my mentors, the CIO of the region of Durham, Kalyan Chakravarti, when he's asked to explain what do people do in AI or even in cybersecurity, he says that they are problem solvers. And whenever there's a problem, they're looking at not one, but multiple ways to solve that particular problem. And I think that's a little nice highway that we can take to sort of talk a little bit to how do you find yourself today at Thompson Rivers University as the Director of Information Security?
Well, that's also a story, of course, Ali.
We're here to hear it.
So I did work for Gandalf for quite a few years. The technology wasn't there yet when I said I want to send 90 megabits per second of data out, and I want a back channel. We were really talking about telephony in those days. The bandwidth just wasn't there, and the compressions hadn't been written, that sort of thing. But of course, when you get to a certain age, you start to have a family. The priority of making sure that there's food on the table, that you have a place to live, that the basic necessities of life are provisioned for become much stronger. And so I studied away, and this really is a key thing. Gandalf Data gave me an enormous opportunity in that they provided me with a lot of training, sent me on training, and allowed me to take the time to learn the technology. And that was a key, right? Moving from that, okay, I didn't come out of a computing program at university. I came out of a psychology program, psychology and science. And there's this whole area of knowledge that I'm not familiar with. And being given that opportunity to learn and to actually work with those technologies was really important. Now, I ended up going through quite a few years working with a variety of technologies that have now long been forgotten. Like people today won't know those technologies or have any idea what we were doing back then with mainframes and mini mainframes and data switches and multiplexers and all that sort of thing. Yeah. So as I progressed through that, I continued training, and I think that's the key, right? That you keep learning. You have to keep on that path of learning, and becoming proficient with technology so that you can prove your value, right? They can provide value back to your organization. Now, as I went through that, unfortunately, Gandalf ran into financial problems in the 90s and went through a bankruptcy. By that time, I had already moved on to contract work with a big company in Vancouver, that's also now gone. McMillan Bloedel, people might remember them as the largest logging and wood product manufacturer in the country. And that gave me more opportunities to learn new technologies and evolve and really get a grip on the full scope of IT. And I think that's key, right? Regardless of where you're going, you need that. You need a fairly broad scope within IT in order to provide value to your organization. Okay. While I was doing that, this opportunity at the Open Learning Agency in Burnaby came up. And lo and behold, Burnaby, the Open Learning Agency had the things that I most wanted in terms of pursuing that original vision, which was a broadcast TV station,
right,
a university, a college, workplace training in technology, IT, and a couple of other things that are still in existence, actually. And so I went after that job with the full intent of still pursuing that dream of interactive video. And it tries you have to be in the right place at the right time in order to really evolve something new. And while I was burrowing away at network and groupware at the Open Learning Agency, YouTube evolved,
right,
among other things. And
so that was about 2006-ish, 2007.
Yeah, I started there in 1999, so I've been working there for quite a while. same issues. We were starting to work with, providing online video snippets for the university courses, and looking at how people interact. And during that time, though, the most peculiar things started happening, and it had happened before, but these things called firewalls started getting put on the external internet-facing router, and that started really back in the early '90s. And before that, we had common sense. We put passwords on our external connections. But information security, in terms of a career path, wasn't something that was really talked about a lot. There were some practitioners out there in banks and very large organizations, but really that sort of 2000 era is when I stumbled on Texas A&M's information security policy, and a little light went on, like, where I said, wow, these guys have written this whole policy around information security. We should really think about doing something like that, because we have all these same sort of components, right? We have all these interactions on the internet at that time, and we were experiencing these very unusual viruses, right? The I love you virus, which these days seem pretty silly, right? They didn't really do anything. They
Or
just
the Y2K thingy.
Well, the Y2K, I worked through that, and I was involved in Y2K and all that. We saved the world. Thank you.
Yes, well done. Thank you, Hugh.
Nothing happened, and everybody went, who cares?
I remember that quite well.
But these things were happening, and we were starting to see some really interesting things happening on our network. We got hit with Blaster next, and we had all these sort of really damaging incidents, and suddenly it became clear that we have to figure out how to work with these, how to fix this, right? We can't have our network crashing because somebody's written a virus that hammers your network and uses up all the bandwidth and crashes systems. I was very fortunate to be working with a fellow named Arthur Bischoff back then, who really, had a sense of what was going on. He was I think he's one of those really core people who just had his hands on the technology from the beginning and recognized that we have to take certain logical steps and block some stuff and make sure that we have a way of making sure that the person on the other end of a remote session is the person they say they are. So antivirus rolled out, we had those things happening. But at that point, around 2000, I decided I was going to start investing in moving my training toward that area. And that's when I took the GSEC course. So SANS is a great organization. I recommend anybody who really wants to understand information security go take those courses, especially if you have any gaps in your knowledge, right, in the broad IT knowledge. Great programs, and now there are many of them. But the GSEC 401 is a great course to start with. And that's where I began. And from there, I started working to really gain an understanding of the full scope of the information security domains, if you like.
And then you grew from there. I think it's just quite fascinating because there are other members of our advisory as well who talk about their career and parlay the sense of how they had to bring information security or cybersecurity into the conversation and to the table over a period of time. Of course, now it's second nature to most organizations, but over a period of time, over the last 10 to 15 years, it hasn't quite been that way. And you've been part of that movement that has made it into something that we talk about. I also think that it's quite fascinating. You've really pointed out the fact that Often what we know comes in the way of our learning, and you've gone in pursuit of what don't I know. Great little points for us. Now you find yourself in the university environment, enterprise grade. You're responsible for the information security for students, for professors, for teachers. How have you found it in terms of you communicating to them what the importance of information security is?
Well, it's when I started, and I've left a little gap, but eventually this opportunity came up in Kamloops to actually build an information security program from scratch, essentially. Not that there weren't great controls in place. I was very fortunate to walk into an organization that had those fundamentals in place. One thing they didn't have was awareness program of any kind. There was no security awareness program. And to be honest, there was very little in terms of there's very little in terms of material that you could purchase. We knew that we needed to reach out to people and help them understand the impact of potential malware and infections and breaches. So we started writing first, of course, policies and standards, but then we wrote our own information security awareness program. So that was really effective. We opened it up to everyone. We were, pushed it quite hard for the first couple of years and got a good portion of the staff and faculty through the program. Excuse me. And at some point, you actually reach this tipping point, if you like, right, where you don't have to push as hard because people know what you're talking about. Not only do they know, but they're starting to change their behaviors and tell other people that no, you can't do it that way. You have to do it this way.
Correct.
And that was really how we got there, right? Reaching out to students. We don't get the same kind of FaceTime with students as we do with faculty and staff. So it's much more of a point engagement. So what we started doing there was going out on the campus, setting up a table on Student Street in our case, which is sort of one of the gathering places on the campus. And we would bring out all kinds of swag and candy and whatever we had. Of course, we had to get a little budget for it. We said, well, we want to spend $1 per student on our campaign. And we would actually try and engage them and just get them to think about information security issues for 5 minutes. All we want is 5 minutes of your time. We want you to do our little quiz. The important thing is that you actually think about the question. We're not marking you. There's no stress. Grab something off our swag table. So that was one of the ways we engaged. The other one was we put up posters, and that in that case you're looking at sort of micro views, right? People walking down the hallway, a funny poster or a good image with a message, and hopefully you get that message through to some extent.
Yeah.
We tried to measure that impact, and it was very marginal, right? It's very hard to change a large population.
Yeah.
Do these small engagements, but we did have some impact.
Yeah, and I'm guessing those awareness programs allowed you to flex a little bit of your artistic muscle as well. Some of your interest in video and production and psychology would have come to the table. And from a personal perspective as well, I mean, I had the honor of working with Farouk Nair at Orion, which was where I began my information security journey. And I remember quite well the creative sessions that we would have around awareness programming for what was then called the G8 members, the first 8 institutions that joined the program of the shared CISO, and now it's extended to almost all the universities and colleges. I want to take up a little point that you mentioned there, and it's a bit of a peculiar word to focus in on, but I'm that kind of guy, so I'm going to focus in on it, is this aspect of our own program. When it comes to information security, there's no one size fits all. There are a lot of standards and frameworks out there, but why was it important to develop something that was native to your university and your community?
Well, one thing that people often don't realize is that the program that you build is going to always have some differences from the rest of the world, right? So
Yeah.
one of the things you have to build into your program are the actual processes that you're using to invoke those appropriate results. For example, every organization is going to have a slightly different process for access to information. We use something we call an ASAR,
Okay.
Application Systems Access Request, so people have to understand what that is. We'd also initiated a data ownership program early on. So we wanted to make sure people understood in our institution what that data ownership process was. You know, who owns the data and who do you have to ask to get access to that data? So that was very important to us. Also, we are located in a province with some fairly strict residency requirements for personal information. It has to be resident in Canada. And people had to be aware of that, but they also had to understand the impact of a breach for the university and what actions they would be expected to take within our school. So you can't buy that off the shelf. You have to create that content specifically for your audience and your organization. You know, who's head of public body and why does it matter for privacy? Who do you call if you suspect there's a breach?
Yeah.
Who is that individual, or that what's the title of that individual who you're going to call? Those kinds of things are unique to every organization and have to be built in, right? You can't just have this high level, you know, update your antivirus and, you know, patch your system. You have to get in there and explain to people exactly what to do in your organization. So that's where the variations come from.
Makes sense. And I think it's really important that our listeners tune in to the fact that you've constantly spoken about security and information security in the collective. You know, not just I. I mean, as the director of information security, you're the first one into the building, and you're never getting out until everybody else is out. But you've spoken about it in the collective we. And I want to unpack that just a little bit because this has been a really profound discussion in that you started off from a different journey, from a different point, and then success being that journey, right? Never a destination. You've kept going and kept going. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's changed over the last 5 to 8 years with this heightened kind of hyper digitization? What's changed in the life of a director of infosec?
Well, a lot has changed, of course. You know, to the point that it's impossible for any information security professional to keep up with everything.
Right.
It's just not possible anymore. And you know, this really goes back to uh, historically, the CIO role grew out of the need for the chief financial officer to hand off all this stuff, right? There was just too much technology. They needed somebody to manage that for them. So that's where the CIO role came from. And now we're seeing the same thing with security.
Yeah.
The CIO is going, there's just too much. Right? I can't deal with this. I need somebody to manage that. And that's really where the chief information security officer has arisen from that need to segment off this massive area or this domain to someone else. So that's been one of the big changes is the amount of knowledge you need to have, the number of vulnerabilities, of course, and the number of types of malware and the attack processes have exploded. And maybe that's not a good sign. You know, we created the information security role and things have gotten worse every year since. But the amount of stuff that we have to deal with is now to the point where we're all building SOCs, right? We all need analysts to be able to deal with the load of just the alerts and the vulnerabilities that we have to deal with every day is overwhelming. I still review vulnerabilities, but I'm not going to get down into the details anymore. There's no hope, right?
Yeah.
If I spent 2 hours of my day going down into the very deep details on vulnerability, I haven't provided value, right? I may get some gratification out of knowing exactly what's going on, but what I'm supposed to be doing is making sure that that vulnerability is closed off for the organization, right? It's not something that any of us are going to have time for. You may have an analyst who will go down into it and figure out exactly what needs to be done to patch or mitigate that vulnerability. But as a leader, you're just not going to have that opportunity, and that's one of the things with stepping into a leadership role. You have to give some things up. You just have to give a bunch of things up that may be fun, but you're not going to have time for. So that's probably the biggest change, is just the volume, right? The volume of information that we have to deal with, and the scope of the program is very large, right? Everything from creating content to try and raise awareness within the institution to trying to figure out what happened with this most recent pandemic, when everybody suddenly walked out the door, perhaps with their desktop under their arm, and or without it, and started using their home computer or whatever device they had to connect to your network. We're going through this massive shift, which has been accelerated, and those are the things that we're living with daily, right? Where things have continued to evolve, and we have to evolve with them.
I think it's if I may add to that, it's the volume, but also the pace at which the change is happening, and the pace at which we're experiencing different situations almost on a daily basis, if not many times in one day. So I think now that you've sort of taken us off the highway a little bit and made an exit at the pandemic, let's talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on your work. I mean, we always often say that expect the unexpected, but you also don't want to know too much about your future, because it can definitely make you complacent or leave you depressed, for lack of a better word. But let's go to that moment when it was decided, all right, campus is shut, everything's going remote. And I literally mean just like that. And everyone now, students, staff, professors, faculty, researchers, are all online. What was that like for Mr. Burley?
It was difficult. First, I had to tell our executive that our risk level had risen fairly dramatically. Right? We went from a fairly stable environment with a consistent level of risk, essentially, to a level of risk that was completely out of the norm. Really, it's very exceptional in that regard. Unless you had already architected a zero trust environment or network, you weren't prepared, and we certainly weren't. We were certainly working on that, but we were about a year away from implementing. So we had people going out the door with archaic VPN connections on systems that were end of life. We survived, but we're still fixing things, right? We're not in that zero trust environment. We don't have good endpoint device control in place yet. We're struggling with that. We don't have two-factor universally within the institution yet, so we're struggling with that. We don't have good control and segmentation of our various cloud services. So we've gone from this environment a couple of years ago where we had, still the fortress and the traditional information security program, to a world that is completely flipped. We now have hundreds of cloud services running. We have people working from all manner of devices. Students we were used to, faculty and staff we weren't. and we need to re-architect that whole structure of the information security program. So there are there are those components I mentioned and a number of others for a zero trust environment, but that's what's really changed, right? We've been sort of catapulted into a year ahead of where we were supposed to be, and we weren't quite ready. The other key learning from this is the business comes first, right? Security is important, but if your business goes under, you don't have a security program
Anything to
to worry
secure.
about.
Yeah.
So the organization has to come first. You learn very quickly that the risk tolerance that you thought the organization had uh, is able to shift, right? It's not fixed where, we won't accept this level of risk. It's okay, we have to stay in business. So if that's what it takes, that's what we're going to do, and we'll try and patch it up after. But the agility that we've had to exhibit over the last few months is quite exceptional, right? And every organization, I think, is in the same boat. They're now at the point where they're willing to take additional risks.
And as we're talking, I'm feeding in a couple of questions. A shout out to the CyberX team. We've got this seamless solution where things are coming into me by messages as well. So I have multiple screens going here. So I'm going to try and stitch those questions in as well. One of them comes in from, I can't quite see the name, but it's an interesting question where it's sort of pointing to the fact of, you had the agility, you had the operational gymnastics to sort of move everything online. But how do you do that, knowing that your budgets are also impacted significantly as a result of this?
Well, that's something that every organization around the world is going to be dealing with down the road, right? We're as a university, we have a slightly different structure in terms of how budget works. We're dependent on students coming back in the fall. If we don't have our students come back, that could have an enormous financial impact. And we are certainly, the university has taken a number of steps to rein in costs, right? None of us carry a purchasing card anymore.
Yeah.
Forget buying anything. If you want to buy anything, it's going to go right to the top and be looked at very closely, because we could be rolling into a fall term minus millions and millions and millions of dollars. So that agility is something that is really forced on us, right? At the same time, we need to move forward. We have provision for possibly online learning over the next months, maybe even a year. We're not quite sure what the impact will be. So we do have to spend some money, and we do have to give reasonable assurance that we have built appropriate controls around those accesses. So at the same time as we're reining in those budgets across the organization, we do have to start spending some to ensure that we can get to that next secure architecture, right? We have to ensure that those services that we're provisioning are secure enough that we're not going to cause a failure of the organization on that side. So it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? That on the one hand, we're all pulling in funds, right? We gotta reserve cash to get through this next phase. But at the same time, go ahead, do that if it's going to make a significant difference organizationally in terms of our survivability, if you like. Because like every organization, universities cannot be down for months on end. We can't go down to ransomware. We have the same real world that every organization has.
I was, as you know, I'm part of the faculty here as well. And, we often talk about, globalization and the world being flat and, all of us being online and engaging. But now I think everybody's having to look into their own sort of bag of tricks and, take local solutions global. We're in this world where we're globalizing, the way we teach. How are we going to take that online? So let's get a little bit into the pedagogies of teaching, which, hearing your background, I'm sure you have quite a lot to sort of comment on. So Hugh, where do you see the university or just post-secondary education in Canada? Where do you see it going now, given that we're not going back to the old? We are in a new normal, which is forever changing.
I want to be very cautious about predicting the future of universities. This is an institution that has now been around for about 2,000 years. And in many ways, it looks pretty much the way it did near the beginning. We have a wise academic at the front, and we have students listening and taking notes and trying to learn, and then essentially feeding back that information to the academic, showing that they had ingested it, right? That they've actually learned something. And I think that's a really important cultural and it's cultural, but it's a personal experience that everyone should have the opportunity to engage in, right? To take that time in their life to focus on learning, and not have to worry about necessarily raising a family or working at something else, where you can actually focus on learning. So I think we'll see students back on campuses again in the future. I'm not quite sure when, but I think it's just too important a part of a young person's life, or even mature students, to come onto the campus, engage with a variety of people, and Thompson Rivers has a very large international cohort, and it's really a chance for that interaction of people that we can't just throw aside and say, we're done with that. We're going to move on to something new. On the other hand, we have to find a way during the pandemic to ensure that we can carry on provisioning those services in a modified way. Now, Thompson Rivers University is very fortunate that we have a large online program. We have about 15 to 16,000 students already before the pandemic who are taking online courses, and so we were kind of ready, right? Now we're trying to take that on-campus cohort and say we have to carry on, we have to keep learning, and we're provisioning those tools for those individuals, and it looks different. Like there's still the professor, there's still the students, and they're building these ad hoc programs, right, where they say, I'm going to switch my lecture to online. I'm going to post my material in that course container. I'm going to allow you to chat back to me or use audio to, if the room isn't too big, to talk to me during the lecture. And I'm going to, of course, continue with rigorous marking and rigorous evaluation of your responses. So that's where we're headed at the moment. But I don't think we're done with that on-campus experience yet. I think it's just too important for people to actually get together and develop those really, some of them, very long-lasting relationships in their lives, where they form them at university. Harder to do online. I mean, it's harder to do if you're not saying, let's go to the pub later and have a beer, or let's go do something silly, or play a sport together. Those sorts of engagements are very hard to replicate in an online program. But
Yeah, no, the fruits of engaging in person, the body language that you can, the visual cues that you can generate, of course, will hopefully not render the in-campus experience mute anymore. These are some important establishments. I think more than anything, our universities and our colleges take on an iconic space in our communities. Here in Oshawa, for example, after the shutting down of GM, the university and the college, Ontario Tech and Durham College, have been sort of the flag bearers of all things innovation in our community. So if people can't gather under these posts, it's definitely a troubling moment for us. I see another question that's come in here, and I'm going to reword it just a little bit. So my apologies to whoever has asked this question, and that comes from the fact that information security often is taught or is sort of discussed academically in certain specialized kind of programs. You're either studying computer science or whatever have you. In your opinion, Hugh, should information security courses, at least one of them, be made mandatory regardless of your field of study? Just like we have gen eds, for example, that you have to take a gen ed in the humanities, you got to take a gen ed in the natural sciences. Should there be something that is specific to information security, just like financial literacy? Hugh.
Well, good question. Would I want to make any student sit through a term of information security when their interest is elsewhere? Mm, I I'm not sure that would be effective. I
Yeah.
think every every student should have to sit through at least an hour of information security awareness training at the beginning of their their school life,
Yeah.
and probably should spend time through their school career refreshing that information, just like anyone who starts with a new organization, right? What are the rules and the regulations and the compliances and the practices that we need to be able to be effective in our environment and not cause problems? Students should be aware, at the beginning, that yes, if you give your credentials away to a paper writing service and we find you that you have been cheating, there's a good chance you're going to get thrown out of school. And that's important for students to know, right? That they need to know that
Yeah.
those credentials are for you only. And we, of course, put compliance policies in front of them and list off the things you shouldn't do, that being one of the many. Um, but how much effort? I think if you're in a business program or in an IT program, I think at least a term of information security is probably a good idea. If you're in another domain of interest, whatever it is, biology, psychology, whatever, not so much. Really, the value is in recognizing um, the fundamentals, right? But
Yeah,
for
I agree. I agree with you in part, and respectfully, I may disagree in that I do think that it's one of the reasons why we may say that we want to keep it to maybe the business courses or this computing sciences courses is because information security and knowledge translation not the easiest sort of couple to sort of bring together. It's not that easy to translate information into different disciplines. It takes a skill set in and of itself. And perhaps we're not at that level of maturity in our infosec journeys here in Canada to sort of propose this. But I do believe that even if you're studying religious studies or urban studies or whatever have you, knowing what transpires online and how to protect yourself is certainly a skill in and of itself that we should encourage all learners to sort of take into account, just as we take physical safety and anything else and mental health and everything else into account. But that said, your perspective is always unique. And because of your uniqueness, you're getting a flood of a couple of unique questions as well. And this actually comes from one of my students. A little bit of a diversion or a pit stop from our current journey. But he asked the question around how do you work with insurance and cybersecurity insurance? And I think I'll give you a bit of context as to where this question is coming from. At Durham College, we've done a lot of projects with companies in cyber insurance. So the question really is how do you deal with it at an institutional level from a cybersecurity insurance perspective, but also at the individual? How do you protect a researcher's IP from getting stolen, and what insurances are there against that? Hugh?
Well, insurance is one of those issues that we're still struggling with as part of our profession, and it's still a tough sell to the executive. Fire insurance, it has been there forever.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that you can't let a building burn down, and we spend a huge amount of money in putting sprinkler systems in and fire alarm systems and doing drills, and and then we buy insurance on top of that. That's how important it is. As information security issues have continued to escalate into the millions of dollars, it's really important that we start to understand that that impact and those information assets really need the same sort of protection. So we spend lots of money now on technology. We are spending lots of money on awareness training, very similar to the fire drills. Right, here's what you should do if your computer becomes bricked by ransomware. Here's what you should do if you think your data's been breached, or if you did something that resulted in a breach of data. So we're kind of still just on the edge. I think insurance is a good investment. I think that the insurance companies are getting very flexible in the way that they will apply those funds, so that they will take the retainer and they will do things like come back and say, well, if you don't use the retainer, you're allowed to reallocate it to some other service, so that you continue to gain value from it. Assessments and that sort of thing. So I think it's important. We are struggling a little bit in BC because we do have an insurance program that is centralized for a lot of the post-secondary environment, and really it's been a matter of, is this problem covered for us? Right? We got this big insurance policy that covers loss of assets. Can you extend it to information assets and systems? And I think we're probably right on that edge now of, yes, we just have to figure out the actuarial information, right? We have to understand how likely those impacts are to be and what the rate is that we have to set. I think initially it's difficult for insurance companies, right? They have to have enough information to make a rational decision about any service. And I think we're still just a bit uncertain. We're getting better information year over year, but compared to fires, it's pretty loosey-goosey still, right? It's not quite clear.
And I think with what you said earlier on is that it's changing not just once a day, but many times a day. That how do you insure against something that's never quite the same yesterday and today? Definitely a terrain that that calls for a lot of more research and a lot of more conversations to be had. So, Hugh, as we sort of go back onto the highway of your journey and sort of come to the conclusion of this power hour, you've sort of underscored the importance of learning from experience, learning from different journeys that you take. During this pandemic, the best way to travel without moving is to read books. And Hugh, sort of summating everything together, what are at least one book that you've read and that you would recommend to people interested in getting into the space of InfoSec to read?
Well, I can throw out a bunch of books that people should read. The important thing is that you start reading. Right? Spend some time reading. If you're a younger person, figure out what you really want to do first. Don't say, I'm going this way. Certainly pursue it, but be flexible. You may not end up wanting to be in information security in the end. It's a different field. Spend some time in school. For those of you who are younger, honestly, spend time in school. Work on your brain. But in terms of books that I think have been influential for me, I'm going to point at Ann Cavoukian's The Privacy Payoff. That was certainly a very influential book for me. And people will say, but Hugh, that's not information security.
Right.
But to be honest, it truly is. We have to understand the areas of privacy, and Anne has done an amazing job of putting privacy into that business context, and well worth reading. Another book that people have kind of forgotten about is Andrew Lindquist's Security Metrics, Replacing Fear, Uncertainty, and Doubt. And really, I think that was, for me, another very influential book, right? That we can measure these programs and that we can show the value more clearly of what we're doing. So Andrew Lindquist, Security Metrics, and Ann Cavoukian, The Privacy Payoff, two really good books to read. Beyond that, if you're really interested in information security career, you're going to have to bear down on those big fat textbooks, the CISSP, the ISACA series, the CISM, the CISA, the CRISC. You're going to have to get through some pretty hefty GSEC material or SANS material across a whole range of areas. But the first thing is to enjoy reading, because you're going to have to do a lot of it.
Not to put you on the spot, but just for 30 seconds, you've made reference to SANS. Shelley Walk-Martin is on the siberXchange board as well, and has at the previous siberXchange we had some introductory courses from SANS run on the platform. A question that I know a lot of people may ask is, there are a lot of certification bodies out there. Do you have besides SANS, do you have a preference on where people should start, or a framework of how people should choose which certification path is the right one for them? 30 seconds, if you can.
30 seconds. SANS, if you're going technical, definitely you're going to get the best technical grounding. EC Council's in that area too with their ethical hacking. If you're going more the managerial route, if you want to get to that high level of information security, it's the CISSP from ISC Squared, along with a number of other of their programs. And it is the ISACA material. Yep. So really getting that business focus down through the ISACA, CISA, CISM, CRISC. Those are all important components, but also go after IAPP. Understand how to talk to your privacy officer. Yep. Make sure you understand their language and what they're talking about and can converse with them. Those are my recommendations.
Hugh Burley, Director of Information Security from Thompson Rivers University, which I've now got correct. Well done, me. Thank you so much for your time. And what I do want to say is that not only did you take us on a journey, you were open and candid with us. And I say this a lot, that the hardest workers and the greatest minds often work with the door open, although the door behind me is shut. That's mostly for audio-video reasons. But thank you so much for having an open door and for being so humble and caring and taking time out of your vacation to join us in this Power Hour. I do want to do a quick recap of, or not really a recap, but I do want to tell you about what's coming up tomorrow. So Hugh made mention of Ann Cavoukian and her work in privacy, and really made reference to the fact that we have a lot of women in cybersecurity that are blazing through new terrain in this space where it's previously been male-dominated. Tomorrow we will be joined by, if I'm not mistaken, we'll be joined by Helen Oakley, who will be talking about her experiences in the world of cybersecurity and how she's journeyed through, and the importance of support groups and peer groups like Leading Cyber Ladies. When Ann Cavoukian spoke at the last siberXchange, she said something where, to the effect of, I can't quite teach people anything. I can only get them to think. And I believe that in today's Power Hour, we've got all of you to think about, where are you at now? And what are you doing to improve and learn more and more about where you want to be going forward? And whether it's in information security or whether it's in any other path that you choose, the importance is to not let your education come in the way of your learning. Continue to learn. Hugh, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. And
Thanks,
we will be in touch, or we will see you at the siberXchange conference from August 10th to the 14th. Thank you very much. And I'll see you all tomorrow at 12 p.m. EST when I'm joined by Helen Oakley. Thanks to the team at siberXchange. This was great fun. This is Ali Hirji and Hugh Burley signing out of the first ever Power Hour. Take care and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.